Hi, everyone. Welcome to Purposeful Parenting, a sensory savvy approach where we are exploring all aspects of child neurodevelopment and how that impacts the behaviors that we see in children from infancy to school age. We're covering it all here. Today, we have with us Cara, the Pocket OT. And Cara, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, your background, and sort of what you do now.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. This is a super passionate area of mine, so I'm excited to talk about it. But I'm Cara Koscinski. I have been an OT for about 25 years, a little over. I got my degrees in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then I got my doctorate in 2019 in Rocky Mountain University in Utah. So a lot of older people came and got this thing called a post-professional doctorate. But as part of that, I studied the executive function systems and interoception. And so that's what got me interested. But what my main goal always is to help my kids. So my kids are now 19 and 22, and they're both autistic. And everything I have done in my career as the pocket occupational therapist has been for them first, and then when it works for them and for the clients, as I've owned a private practice for a while, then I go ahead and publish it into a book or but it's got to be researched and it's got to work for my kids first.
Aw. Yeah, so we have one of the best here. I can't wait to dive into this. So today we're going to talk about one of the lesser known sensory systems, but it's so important. It is called the interoceptive system. Cara wrote an entire book on this system. So like I said, we have one of the best to explain what this is and how it impacts behaviors. So Cara, I'll let you get started. Can you explain to us what interoception is?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the fact that a baby is born anywhere in the whole universe, right? Anywhere in the world on Earth, and has genetic predispositions. So that means the baby has certain genetic makeup and the environment then contributes. So when that baby's born, he or she has a certain personality and a certain way to respond to the world. And then through the experiences of life, the baby starts to make meaning of all of this. And in fact, the infant doesn't even realize that he or she is separate from the mother until about 6 months of age. So it's neat that through experiences and practice, the baby realizes that if I make some motion, like bat a toy, something might happen, like a music might go off. So then the baby starts to feel hunger, right, and thirst more than usual. So it starts out as like a reflex. The baby starts to suckle when you brush the baby's cheek, and then the baby loses those reflexes and they become purposeful.
Mhm.
But that requires the baby to start to learn what hunger is. So how does the baby know what hunger is? What thirst is, that he or she has to go to the bathroom when we're working on the potty training. And also, interoception is what causes the person to know and feel emotional awareness. So it's not only what makes me different from you, but it's also what I feel about my world. So I said about the baby being born because the baby is unique in the experiences that it has as the baby grows and becomes a child and then an adolescent, just like I'm different from everyone else. So our experiences are very unique. And that's what makes interoception such an elusive kind of thing, is because it's special to you and it's lived through your experiences.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that was a great explanation. Like even just thinking back to infancy, and it's all starting there. That's
Yeah, it is, because the baby's got to learn that, not when those reflexes go away at certain ages, purposeful movements start. The other thing that's super cool is that interoception is not new. It's been around and been mentioned since the 1700s,
wow.
but people didn't have a way at that time to study it because, we are just learning about, the neurologists and psychiatrists were just doing autopsies and learning about this. But since it's such a subjective sense, it took us a while to discover that there is actually a part of the brain called the insula
Okay.
that is responsible for the feelings and emotions and all of the lived experiences of the human being. So it's not new, but we're learning more about it as we get more technologically savvy, I suppose.
Yeah, all the brain science and neuroscience that's coming out. Yes, that's giving us all this information. That's awesome.
Yeah, it
Um,
is pretty neat. Yes, yeah. So
yeah.
one other thing I wanted to tell
Okay.
you about the insula. I'm infatuated with this insula.
Oh,
But it has connections, though, in our body to the amygdala. One of the things about the amygdala is it's the fear center of the brain. So I know that I'm often asked, well, how do I just know, like, that spidey sense of danger? The body actually is trained just because of survival, right? The body's designed for survival. And this insular cortex connects with the amygdala, the fear center, to look for cues around us and maybe how our body starts to feel like butterflies in the stomach. So there are connections there, and also to the memory parts of our brain. So the insula kind of connects memory with, I've done that before and it was dangerous to walk down that alley, and I won't do that again. But
mhm.
the problem with our kids that have sensory processing deficits is that they don't have a strong connection, or it's not developed as fully as we'd like it
Yeah,
to be.
it could
Hmm.
be confusing. Yes. One thing I wanted to point out, I remember reading the book, you talk about intrinsic sensory systems versus extrinsic. So this sensory system is intrinsic, meaning it's internal inside you, right? Can you explain that a little bit? I know
Yes,
this word
that's
is so confusing for parents.
it is. So I'm thank you, because one of my big things as the pocket OT is to write my everything I want to do is in layman's terms, because I'm a parent first. So I
Yeah.
had to learn all this just like you did as a parent. It's important to me. So yeah, intrinsic simply means that it's something that we as an individual live.
Okay.
So that's why it's connected to our own memories. This is a really interesting thing. If any of the parents listening are interested in something like this, there's actually a part of the brain, and it's called the homunculus. It's a big word. But if you look at that, you can see how the brain's nervous system gives like such connections to different parts of the body. And you could see that things like the hands that are really responsive to sensory touches and textures, and the face, and especially the lips, they have a lot of sensory receptors that go directly to the brain, so that we can say, oh, what we feel is bumpy. So that's how we start to relate to the environment, is we pick up something external and feel, and we label it. Then we
Yeah.
label it, oh, this is a smooth table, this cotton ball is fuzzy.
Yeah.
But the problem comes, though, is that when the intrinsic body, or so when that sense isn't developed, the internally, that sometimes kids with sensory processing disorders have trouble feeling. It's kind of like they would have rubber gloves on. Or if you're a mom listening to this, you know how when you reach into your purse and you know where your lipstick is if you're feeling for it? It would be like you couldn't do that anymore. And you're pulling out the wallet and saying, this isn't lipstick. It
Yeah.
takes time, and it can be very frustrating if there's some kind of disconnection between what you're seeing and feeling. It's kind of be confusing for kids. So
Yes.
that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about that further. So how would we kind of touch on this, interoceptive processing impact a child's functioning, or what behaviors might we likely
Mhm.
see?
Behavior is so intimately connected. I'm so
Yeah.
glad you asked that question, because my big theory is that behavior is communication. And this is called a strengths-based approach. There is a time, and if I want all the parents to think about this, when you have that itty bitty baby in your arms and the baby starts to fuss or cry, it's kind of like your job as a parent to look at the baby and say, what could that baby be telling me? And
Hmm.
it's usually one of a few things, right? Hunger, thirst, wet diaper, uncomfortable or sleepy. But then there's a certain point in our lives that we stop reading the baby's behaviors and saying, oh, she's a terrible 2-year-old, right? And we start looking at behaviors as something negative. But we know, though, that some kids with special needs or that have some communication problems, they're not going to have the words to say, I'm hungry. And in fact, they might not even feel that sense of being hungry. And then they're hungry, and think about how you're hungry. You might have a headache. You might start to
Hmm.
feel really crummy. And the kids start acting out because they don't even know what's happening, that they need to eat. So it's so important to continue reading behaviors well beyond when kids are, unable to speak, because a lot of kids, like my own son, my younger one, he couldn't talk until he was about 6 or 7.
Hmm.
And he was always making holes in the walls and banging his head. And I thought, what's going on? And here he had a problem in his head. He needed ear tubes and he wasn't able to say my ear hurts. So we saw
Yeah.
head banging.
Yeah.
So parents, I encourage you to look at behavior as not a bad thing, as an expression of what is he or she trying to say, that, that the words don't come easily,
Hmm.
or it's maybe
Hmm.
they don't even know. So that's pretty
Yeah.
common.
Yes. And
Hmm.
I'm even thinking of an experience I had today at work with a kiddo who
Hmm.
got frustrated because a game he was trying to play was too difficult. But he didn't tell me
Hmm.
that right away. He started showing me through his behavior that he was done. He ran and hid. And so I was trying to figure out what happened because he was enjoying it, but then we just hit this wall. And when I was started, asking questions and trying to really look under the behavior, he told me, I'm hungry. So I was like,
Wow.
well, just wait. So he said he was hungry. And so I started asking, like, well, did you eat breakfast? This was at 8 o'clock in the morning. Yes, 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 yes. I was like, oh, well, maybe it's time for a snack. We could get a drink of water. And he's like, no, that's not going to help me feel better. I was like, oh, well, then I wonder what what your body's trying to tell me right now. And he sat there and he thought, and he said, that game is difficult. And then that's what it
Wow.
was. It wasn't the hunger, but see that internal connection. He knew he was frustrated. He knew he didn't want to play that game anymore, but he had trouble connecting what he was feeling inside to tell me, that game was
Yes, that
too hard. And
is.
that's when he said, it's too difficult. I was
Oh,
like, yes, okay, now
yay.
I get it. Let's make it easier. Let's problem solve. And we were able to move past it. But now that you brought all that up, that was a prime example of interoception.
It is. And you're an OT, I would definitely bring my child to, because
Oh,
in a lot of, well, before we knew this, a lot of my kids' therapists, not that there was anything, they just didn't have the information,
yeah,
looked at it through a strict behavioral
yeah.
lens. An example that I've seen in feeding therapy is that one of my older son had a hard time eating and with different textures, like a lot of our kids do. And he would come to feeding therapy and he would vomit when we were working on peanut butter, and he would vomit every time.
Hmm.
And she would say, clean it up, and give him a rag and clean it up. And then he would just refuse to go. We had allergy testing done and he was allergic to peanuts.
Oh, wow.
So that's what started me on this quest to think, wait a minute, some kids can't express themselves.
Yeah,
We've got to look at medical first. So that brings me to kind of the next thing, is that we should always look at the medical first and make sure that there's
yeah.
nothing. Allergies or reflux can be very painful. And a lot of kids have stomach issues
Hmm.
that have sensory issues, probably because they're worried and living in this like constant state of fear. And that can be scary too, right? Looking for threats kind of makes you feel like you're walking in a moving house, like, oh my gosh, I can't get my
Constant.
bearings. Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I definitely feel like you are way ahead of a lot of people looking
Yeah.
at the why behind the behavior.
Yeah, yes. And I think we know now that we're getting more sensory education and resources out there, that behavior approaches don't work for our sensory kiddos. It does, and
Right.
maybe it'll work short term, but to get that long term effect, it doesn't work. And so that's where you start to wonder, okay, what is going on? Yeah, yeah,
Right, right. There's always a reason for
always.
everything. And I think,
Yeah,
yeah, and I think even if you look at the Snickers commercials, right? I don't know if
yeah,
we're allowed to say Snickers, but they're saying that they're showing this person that's this little, older lady, and she's hungry and she turns into like the Hulk.
yeah,
And then you're like, what happened to little Esther? She's the Hulk now. And I think that's a good analogy though for our kids, is they can be these sweet little innocent, creatures, and then all of a sudden they turn into the Hulk, and it's like, what happened to my little boy?
yes. And
But
they're not trying to be, I just talked about this
no,
with somebody else the other day. They're not purposefully being bad and difficult.
no.
Kids don't want to make your life harder. Something's always going on underneath the surface. So, yeah,
Right, right.
it's just trying
Absolutely.
to figure that out.
Yeah. And it's the same thing though with emotions. So when we talk about
Yeah.
emotional awareness, this again, just through my own studies, I was thinking, why there's this thing that we all know about, but we don't know what it's called. So it's called theory of mind.
Okay.
That would be like as if any one of us went into a party or a gathering, like a room of people, and I said, oh, Jimmy's over there and he's got a frown and he's standing like this. He might be angry or upset. And if you see, I don't know, Martha in the corner crying, she might be having a not as good of time. And someone that's laughing, they're like the life of the party. So we can do that as neurotypical people, but we expect kids to go into school settings and community settings and interact. And sometimes they're not able to do that, or they may look like they're saying the wrong things. But if they don't even know what they're feeling
Yeah.
inside, how can we say, okay, go to school and figure out the social, right? So
Right.
we've got to work on
Take other
the
people's
word.
perspectives when they don't even know themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're hard on our kids, and I do think that even social skills groups that we, push our kids into, it can be
Hmm.
difficult if they don't know what they're feeling inside. And that is also interoception, is our emotional awareness. So that's, something we need to work on in the younger kids, not just adolescents.
Right, right. So it's like
Hmm.
discriminating um all those feeling words. So mad versus sad,
Hmm.
excited versus content, or even starting to get a little more deeper with it, like frustrated versus annoyed, and
Yes.
what um what it feels like. You brought up butterflies in your stomach, what
Hmm.
how that is different than hunger in your stomach,
Yes.
all
Right.
those internal feelings that your body is getting. And it's just so amazing to think about because we take it for granted. We do this
Oh,
all day long
yes.
automatically, and we're not getting traffic jams in our brain, those messages.
Right.
So it's very important to look at.
It is. And I think then when we think about kids that are less verbal,
Yeah.
I don't like the functioning levels. I don't do the high functioning, low functioning,
Yeah.
because I truly believe that my children are both as wonderful as they can be. And I don't, I'm not a person that labels, but I'll say less verbal, if that's okay, that when kids can't express themselves, then it might be hard for them to say hungry. And, your little guy today could say difficult. So, what I encourage parents to, where would they start then is the question.
Yeah.
Start with touching the body. So, when a child's banging their head or exhibiting something, then just then say, where is it here? And maybe just if the child's okay with you touching them, just hold the head, or look at the mouth, and just start to help them to feel the wear on their body that is.
Yeah.
So another really cool thing is they can just, I love drawing a body, or if we have this big poster paper, like in school, the rolls of paper,
Yeah.
tracing the child and saying, where do you feel now? And just keeping a constant list of, here in the belly, and just pointing, but don't use as many words as I've just used,
Hmm.
here, and just encourage kids to start showing you where it might
Yeah.
hurt, and then giving them words. But,
Yes.
the other cool thing is, I know I was working with a child, and this is so interesting. I was speaking about sensory processing long ago, and the mother came to me and said, I'm not going to talk to you about the son that I know has sensory processing difficulties. I'm going to talk to you about my other one. And she said that in Texas, he had been bitten by, I want to say over like 50 fire ant bites.
Oh.
And if you know what those feel like, they hurt. He didn't even notice. She said
Oh,
they had to
wow.
take him to the ER because his face was swelling up and his throat was closing and he was starting to get purple. They were blood on his legs. He had no idea. So can you imagine
That is,
not
yeah.
knowing and feeling that? That's got to be really, difficult for parents.
Dysregulating. Yeah.
It
Disorganizing.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
Wow.
and then the child not even being able to notice it. So then, what they did was started some occupational therapy,
Mhm.
and they worked on, just some activities, and they said, they noticed his body language because he didn't have a lot of verbal. So the other thing that you've got to do as a parent is look for like the eyes, are they dilating, the pupils getting bigger? If you see
Okay.
your child getting upset, at the palm sweaty, is there a heart rate? So you can even teach kids to feel their heart.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yes. So it's almost like you're bringing that interoceptive, those messages to the conscious level when you were talking
Yes.
about, drawing the body
Hmm.
and show me where it hurts or whatever. So yeah, I love that. And I
Yeah.
like what we're getting into now. We're kind of diving into arousal and regulation. So this reminds me of another client that I worked with. He was older and he was very, very intelligent and verbal, but having some sensory and interoceptive processing challenges. And he was able to tell me that as this relates to arousal and emotions, he has big explosions, like big meltdowns,
Wow.
even at the age of 13. And he was telling me he doesn't feel those messages from his body when he's starting to upregulate. We really broke it down, like, well, what does your stomach do when you start to get frustrated? And
Right.
he was able to say, well, it feels like it's boiling. It's like, yeah, it does. And we
Hmm.
put some pieces together, but it was cool for him to be able to tell me that there's no time in between. I go from feeling fine to feeling explosive in a matter of 2 seconds. And so again, we're really working on breaking down those messages from his body as he's starting to heighten. And okay, when your stomach starts to feel like it's boiling, I wonder what that's telling you. What could we do in that moment? Um, but that's tricky because if
That
you're
is
having trouble
tricky.
even feeling it until
It,
it's so far gone, trying
yes,
to catch
yes.
it's been
It
interesting.
I bet, and it takes a lot of practice. So I don't
Yeah.
want someone listening to this thinking, "Oh, this is going to happen overnight," because
Yeah.
obviously these things they make us who we are, and that's really deeply rooted in our brain. So to pull that out, might be difficult for kids, and it
Mhm.
might be easy for some kids, but naming it to tame it. We always say name it to tame
Yeah.
it.
Yep.
Try to put a name. But the other thing is that I was looking at there's this way that we regulate. So there's like a window, this, of regulation. So we
Mhm.
all are a little tired during the day, a little more excitable, a little more
Yeah.
angry, but we are in a window where we are able to learn and
Yes.
access our higher brain, right? And think and make decisions.
Yes.
But the other issue here with interoception is that it can be so fast, like 0 to 600,
Mhm.
that chemicals then start to drive the stressful, feelings in the body, and there's no conscious thought. It just becomes like, I'm going to fight, I'm going to run away.
Yeah.
Something's going to happen where the job of my body is safety, and I got to get safe. So just know though, parents listening, when that happens, that's not a teaching time, right? The goal
Right.
is getting safe. And then afterwards, those chemicals slowly get reabsorbed and saying, now, what was that like? Was it like a volcano? And then maybe even show a picture of a volcano,
Yeah.
and pictures are so critical here because a lot of kids learn by looking at it. So,
Yep.
draw a volcano, look at a volcano, use those visuals if you can too.
Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I like that we brought up sort of like what this is my final question here is what can we do even at a young age to start to promote some of this interoceptive processing, emotional awareness. And it sounds
Mhm.
like you said, when they're regulated, after they've calmed down, start to talk about what that felt like.
Exactly. So
Okay.
when I encourage, and if I had to do it over with my kids, I would do this from the day one, is
Oh,
start to name it. So if you know their routine, the first thing I encourage parents to do is to take notes, and see, okay, 2 o'clock, I give a snack because you get busy in the daytime and you don't
mm-hmm.
realize that, oh my gosh, it's 3. No wonder Joey's, acting really angry and sad
Yeah.
because he's hungry. So just keeping a tight, if you can, I know a lot of us work and are busy, but just kind of keeping a journal and noticing with certain patterns in
Yeah.
your child.
Yeah.
It's like you're a detective, kind of, so play Sherlock Holmes, right?
Yeah.
See what's going on and then name it. So I always encourage parents, even in early intervention, which is the first of 3, to
Mm-hmm.
name it. So do you feel angry? And I'll make my body match
Show
the
them. Yeah.
child's.
Yep.
And then I'll say, oh, let's do angry together. And then eventually the kids like that you've heard them.
Yep.
There's
Validating.
something to,
Mhm.
yeah, there's something to be
Yeah.
said for feeling listened to and heard. And even when they're, hungry, I'll say, we'll go in the refrigerator and I'll touch my belly, and I'll say, touch your belly. Oh, it's hungry. So just again, renaming what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And the frustration, though, is the hardest one, though. It's
Yeah.
when things are difficult. I think that's the hardest thing for kids to say, because that's when you see the behavior, because
Yeah.
it does tend to go really quickly to escalation when
Right.
they're frustrated. And what about you if you're frustrated? And I think COVID really helped us to understand that when things don't go as planned, we all feel dysregulated.
Yeah.
So whenever we're frustrated with our kids, we need to just think of, oh my gosh, that was us 2 years ago.
Right. When
We
our
felt the
worlds
same
were
way.
flipped upside down. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So naming it is really good. Start using drawings and start, saying you things like fire, oh, hot, when you're giving, you might be giving your child a hot potato chip or, a spicy wing, and say, ooh, hot, fire, and just
Yeah.
helping them to find those words if you can, or at least touch the parts that are sore or hurt. And
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I just thought of something. In the book, I decided to create these little characters, and they're like Lub Dub Heart. So I
Mm-hmm.
made them kind of kid friendly with like little eyes, like Lub Dub's cute. And there's Billy Bone, and if your child breaks a bone, Billy might be hurt. So kind of
Oh,
helping kids to see the inside of their bodies as
yeah.
in a non-threatening way. So
Right.
that's one of the biggest emails I get, is that's help change everything,
Yeah. Yes.
so you don't
And I
want kids to
think
be scared.
seeing that, yeah, and that's such a good way. And now I'm thinking of the kids, the clients that I'm treating, like seeing that heart, like this is inside you. And that's when you are upregulating, feeling that love,
Right.
love, get faster and faster and faster. What does that
Yes.
mean? That means you're
Yes.
ramping up. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's
yeah,
great.
just reading the body. So,
Yeah.
those are good places to start for, for anyone, and just try your best to, and this is one of my things I always say, and I always end with, but, instead of joining someone else's chaos, energy, especially negative energy, just transfers so quickly. Just remain calm and share that calm with your child, instead of joining their chaos, just
Yes.
share your calm. And I struggle with that with my own kids, because we all have issues, right? But
Mhm.
especially because they have decreased interoception. So
Yes,
I'm always
yes,
trying my best to deep breathe and teach mindfulness and
yes,
regulation. So
yes, yes. That is a great advice to end with, because we do have to start wrapping up. So, Cara, I
yes.
am going to let you describe the free resource that you have for our audience.
Sure. So I'm going to give you, so if you were to purchase it's called Interoception, How I Feel. It's a
Okay.
long title, Sensing My World from the Inside Out. But with the book purchase comes some free resources. And it's the cards. It's Billy Bone and Lola Lung. And you can download these from the link. And there's a couple other activities so that you can start practicing this immediately with your child if you like what we've talked about.
Absolutely. Oh, I can't wait to look at that. Well, thank you so much for being here, Cara. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience learned a lot from this chat as well. I enjoyed it so much, and I will see everyone tomorrow for our next interview.